Chinese university, community college, university?
I think it's university.
University. And so he was talking about different levels of insider-outsiderness there. And my question to him, when you're talking about multiple insider-outsiderness, did your personal relationships, eventually, I don't know at the time, but eventually you ended up marrying a Chinese woman. Did that give you a closer insiderness than other people, other Americans teaching over there who would not have established a relationship? And my guess is that you would be more emic associated with the culture by marrying someone from that country than a person who would not.
Yes, I think that's
So
fair.
that was, well, that's just one more way in which there are many levels of insiderness, outsiderness. Did you have some? Oh yeah, an interesting take on the distinction between emic and etic. It can also be said that the emic interpretation focuses on describing how things are done, while viewing through the etic lens prompts questions of why things are done the way they are. So, interesting. You know, the underlying economic realities and things of that nature. Any other ask in class on the emic etic papers? All right, for those of you that have gotten back a mini lit review, ask in classes.
I have one.
Oh,
I know this, but mine came from the website without page number, so what should I have done?
good question.
And should I have put paragraph number?
Yes, then you have to, did everybody, remember I said that one of the things that boggles my mind way back the first day is the fact that we do the Harvard plagiarism, we talk about plagiarism, and then inevitably in the very same class, your first class, I will get direct quotes and or direct paraphrases that don't have a page number, which causes me to lose more hair, and I don't have much left to lose. And Sarah says, well, in my defense, I knew that, but it didn't have a page number because it was online. What do you do then? That's a good question. The answer is you have to count paragraphs. And you do P-A-R-A, period, and then the number of
I
paragraphs.
just pulled it up and wrote it to the side there, so I had it.
But I think they do it as P-R-A,
P-A,
R-A, period,
period.
I think, but check that. I'm not sure about, but I think they do it with the period. Is that the only one?
I have two. One's repeating date and one's like p-values.
Oh, this is really confusing to people. This is missed a lot. This is an APA issue. You know that in a paragraph, if you're citing Jones 2010, and you're talking about things that Jones has said, it is often the case that later in the paragraph, you will have another Jones said. And the question is, do you repeat the date or not? And the rules on that are kind of funny. They're, in fact, they're complex. So, all right, that's a conceivable paragraph. Would you agree? You know, there's content in between. The question is, do you have to repeat that in the same paragraph? And the answer is no. Exception. Then, if you have done that, and now you come back to Jones. And the answer is yes. Why?
Two different years.
You wouldn't know which one. So, unless you have a situation like this, If you're just repeating Jones in the same paragraph, you don't need to. Then, new paragraph, recite author date. Because this citation does not carry over into this paragraph. All right, that's case number 1. Case number 2. All right. The town was poor. The entire reference to Jones is parenthetical. Jones is not the subject. Here, Jones is the subject of these sentences. So the only thing in parentheses is the date itself, because the author is part of the sentence. Here, the author is not part of the sentence. The author is parenthetical. If you do that, nor did it, too many of those, nor did the town have much in the way of educational resources. Jones 2009, the entire thing is parenthetical. You can have 1,000 of those in the same paragraph, and the APA rule is, if it's parenthetical, you must repeat the date every time. So that's odd rules, and they're different. So if Jones is the subject, and the only thing is just the date that's parenthetical, you have to cite it the first time, but subsequent citations just like that in the same paragraph, it's redundant. But if it's this way, even if there's 10 of them in the same paragraph. So example, later on you do one that's a direct quote. So no matter how many times you repeat it, if the entire thing is parenthetical, you do repeat the date. That's kind of a confusing, and if you read the APA manual, you have to read it about 5 times before that becomes clear. It's not clearly written. Okay, as long as we're on this, the statement that is a direct quote, then the quote mark, then the citation, and then the page number. Or you might have put the citation up here, so in that case it would be just the page number. And by the way, which of these is correct?
The second one.
Second.
There's a space there. Okay, that's a confusing rule. A lot of people miss that. What was your other one?
The one with the p-values.
Okay. Stat symbols. When to italicize them and when not. Remember, there is a table in your APA manual that shows what those stat symbols are, which ones get italicized, what they're called, what their name is, whether they're capped or not. P-value is not. And then the thing that is also related to that is, don't forget that before and after an equal than, equal, less than, or greater than sign, there's always a space before and after that, because of it's just harder to see if you don't put a space before them. And thinking about p-values, even if you have not quoted that directly, and quoting a direct quote on a p-value is probably not worth it. Remember, we should say quotes for things that are quotable, and what the p-value is probably not quotable. That hardly ranks up there with Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. So don't quote that kind of stuff. On the other hand, if you're putting in actual statistical values, that's probably worth a page number because it'd be a paraphrase, because that's very specific. Think of it, rule of thumb. You've read an article, and you remember what the article is about, you remember what the points it was making, the implications of it, things of that nature, without having to refer back to the piece. Jones 2010. But if you have to go back to a specific page to look up specific information, like the number of students in a sample, or a specific t-value or p-value or something like that, you're not going to remember that without going back and looking it up, right? Well, if you have to go back and look it up, that would suggest it means that you're getting ideas directly from the author that you can't remember, that are not general, that they are specific, and therefore they would count as a paraphrase, and you'd have to put a page number with them. Does that make sense on the distinction? So, to me, and I don't know that I've ever read that, but to me, the rule of thumb is, can I remember what's in that without going back and looking up specific information? If I can, I don't put a page number. If I can't, I think, that must be a paraphrase. Also, lists. A lot of times you will find a list of 5 things, and in that list might go over 6 pages, because you have like 2 or 3 paragraphs under each one in the list. Has everybody read things like that? And when you're quoting or when you're writing, you only write the titles or the names of those, and so you don't really, because it's almost self-evident to some extent what's in those, but you do list the 5 or 6 things that are in the list, even though they're spread out over 6 pages. Well, that would be kind of like a summary paraphrase, and so the list came from, not from you, but from the person who wrote it. So if you list those, then you would want pages 5 to 8.
I have a question.
So summary lists to me are paraphrases.
One of the things that I was actually quoting, it had, and you didn't mark anything in here, so I'm assuming I did okay. You had.
Well, or maybe I was reading faster than I should have been and missed it. But don't assume anything. You know what they say about that.
Yeah, there was, it was, the text was on one page, and then the next page was a table, and then the text continued on the following page. So I was quoting something that had text from the 2 text pages, but not the table page. So I didn't say, say page 3 through 5, I did page 3, 5.
That's correct.
Okay,
That would be correct.
I just wanted to make sure.
And then somebody did that incorrectly and used an ampersand instead. So somebody did that same thing and did pages, and it would be PP,
Right.
because it's page plural for page. So it would have been pages 3 ampersand 5. That's incorrect. It's comma is 3 comma 5. So somebody used the ampersand. I don't remember who that was. Other ask in class on the mini lit reviews.
While you're picking that up, I did find in the APA manual that paragraph is period.
Yes, okay. I was thinking what typically there's that's one thing they're consistent on is because of the it's an abbreviation.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Brant, you have one that you missed, I think, or maybe it's somebody else.
Asking class?
Yes, maybe. Well, I remember you did it incorrectly. Maybe I didn't mark it on yours. Somebody.
Now, you already talked about that, the use of where you put the dates in.
Okay. All right, but somebody else had, maybe you did this one incorrectly, but maybe I didn't mark it on yours. Somebody had references in bold. Was that you? Okay, so that's in here. And Brad, I know you had that, but maybe I marked it somewhere else. For some reason, even though references is center head, and it would seems like a level 1 heading, and so therefore you would seem like it would be bold. APA, for whatever reason, does not bold that. So when you get to the reference page at the end of a paper, it is not bold. In your dissertation, it will be all caps, and it will be down 2 lines. Just in the dissertation, when you start your references, you will treat it just like the first page of a chapter, like the first page of chapter 1, first page of chapter 2, etc. And so the references will be all caps, and it will be 2-inch margin. First page of chapter 1, the first page of chapter 2, etc., and the first page of the references has a 2-inch top margin instead of a 1-inch. That's dissertation stuff. All right, Bobby's. How do you do what she did? Barron et al., 1999, devised other questionnaires. All right, now, your article was by Cowett et al., right? And you didn't read Barron et al. About those other instruments. You only know about those other instruments because Cowie talks about it, right? Okay. So if that's the case, these Barron et al., whoever the associate authors, you didn't read them, and they do not go in your reference list, because your reference list is for the things that you read, or at least scanned. There are things that you can scan pretty quickly. And I sometimes have, maybe guilty or not, but I can get a lot of information out of titles. And depending upon what I know of a piece and how important it is, I will sometimes cite that, even though my knowledge of it comes from reading several people about it and also studying references lists. So I feel I have enough knowledge of that I'm actually going to cite that as one of my own, even though I've never really spent much more than just kind of glancing at an abstract or something on it. But it's enough my knowledge of that based upon those various sources that I think it's important to list in my own references. On the other hand, in this, if Barron et al. Have done the ABC instrument, and the only thing I know about that is reading Cowie, then Barron et al., the ABC instrument, is not going to go in my reference list, and the way you handle that in the text would be Barron, Jones, and Smith without the date, and then you'd put comma, cited in Cowie et al. That you are reading, developed the ABC test that does whatever. And how do you know how to do that? Miller's quick guidelines, quick APA guidelines, that little 4-page thing. I'm telling you folks, there's a lot packed into that. Some of you have said that you've read it, and I really don't think that you have. There's a lot of information packed into that, including the fact that data are plural, and how to use that superscripts for APA are not in, that it'd be 21st ST, not 21st superscript ST. There's a lot of little things, including what's italicized, what isn't, how to do cited in. There's a lot of information packed into those 4 pages. That's one that you should look at. And I know it's still APA 5, I haven't updated it to 6, but the stuff that's in there, that stuff didn't change. So that's one that you should look at.
I do have a bunch of asking class. It
Okay.
was just written on so much, I wasn't discerning it at first.
Okay, well, she's got a couple more, so let me do these first.
I didn't catch it at first because I was just so overwhelmed.
You weren't here the first day when we talked about that, were you?
But I read it. I read that you said a lot. You said you wrote on it a lot, but I was
But you didn't really know what that meant.
No.
Now you do.
I did.
Once you start making the changes, it's usually not as bad as
Yeah.
you get your paper.
And Joanna,
I just want to go. I need to go back to middle school.
Joanna, remember this. Get a highlighter
Yeah.
and mark the first one. Do it if you have to go to Purdue OWL to understand it, whatever you have to do to fix it, it may be as simple as the fact that you left out a comma.
Right. I generally put too many commas in, because
Okay.
I think that's
Well,
one thing.
But anyway, whatever it is, fix that one and highlight it.
Yeah,
Then fix the next one and highlight that. Then at the end, even though there's a lot on there, there's a finite number of those. There's probably not more than 30 marks on there.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't use a highlighter, what people do is they'll miss some. It's almost impossible to get them all without missing. So the highlighter will make sure that you have fixed it. The other thing for all of you, don't fix something if you don't understand why you're fixing it. Either look it up or call me or ask me. There is nothing that irritates me more than seeing the same mistake on the next draft. Because somebody either didn't bother, couldn't read my writing, that's another thing, can't read my writing, call me, get an interpretation. Usually, within 3 or 4 minutes, I can figure out my own writing. Sometimes it takes longer than that, but usually within that amount of time. But it really is irritating, not just for me, but for all professors, if you make the same mistakes over. Learn from your mistakes so you don't make those again. Okay, this is a common one. Here is a series, theory, practice, and policy. And people do that kind of stuff a lot, and the three of those are often used in the same sentence. She's got theory, comma, practice, and policy. That is the informal way of punctuating. Journalism does it that way. That is not a comma before the and. You got 3 items, and then the and precedes the last one. And informal writing and journalism, you do not put a comma before the and. But in formal writing, you do. And dissertations and scholarly writing is formal. So in these classes, you have to shift out of this is informal mode and leaving the commas out to putting them in. So there is a comma before the and in a series because this is formal scholarly writing.
I had another instructor ding me on that because I did put it in, so I guess it's because of the assignment
Well,
being more informal
yeah.
than this one is why. So that was why I took it out this time, and I was like, well, so that explanation makes sense now.
Well, and I guess there are you'd have to stop and think about who your instructor is, what kind of writing it is. So
I've been in that same situation where one instructor wants Oxford comma and another instructor omit needless commas. And so, yeah, then you start,
but to me, the rule is formal versus informal. And to me, scholarly writing is formal. But maybe that's because I'm an old fogey. Was this other person younger?
I'm not sure.
Sometimes younger folk are more likely to leave it out too. So. Younger folks are more likely to do split infinitives. If I remember, I'm kind of old and set in my ways on some of these formalistic things. Is that it? Let's see some C-means. There's an ask in class.
I have a question.
Okay, we just talked about that. What?
I have a question about the citing other people.
This cited in?
Right.
Yes.
It's so I noticed I was reading an article. I noticed that they the authors cited somebody else, and they said that they would have used whatever the concept or the idea that the author cited, they used it to refer to leaders, for example, and they said that leaders behave in this way. But when you look at the work that was cited, they weren't actually referring to leaders. They were saying employee on employee interaction. So
Okay.
if you just take a concept and it works for your setting, but that's not what the authors actually
When you
said.
do a cited in, it is incumbent upon you as a professional scholar to use it correctly. And so if you're going to change the meaning, then you should either say the construct whatever, cited in Jones means such and such. However, for the purpose of this paper, or for this work, it will be interpreted in a different way. So, and a lot of people don't do it. By the way, just because people have cited something, it is incumbent upon you as a scholar to do things accurately. But there are people who will purposely cite X because X has cachet, status, etc. And then, because their agenda is different, they've gotten the status of citing X, but they say what they say is inconsistent with X, and unless somebody catches them, then they have gotten status for their own work, which is saying the opposite or something different. And I had a case of that that I was a blind reviewer for. It was a piece that was, the entire piece was just an ideological rant. But they had done all kinds of citations. And almost all the citations were from papers. And they had submitted this to journal, and what they were clearly trying to do was to get a blind reviewed stamp of approval of this ideological rant. And so when I sent this back to the editor, I said, this is clearly, and I was pretty explicit in a longer review than usual as I was doing that. And the editor sent me back and said, yes, we were quite aware of that, for as explicit as you were for all of the faults and why, some of the other reviewers weren't as explicit, but they were more scathing and more to the point that they basically said this is BS. But they didn't go into the detail you did. So other blind reviewers, as well as the editor, had recognized what was going on there. But that doesn't mean that if enough of those pieces go out, that sometimes it's going to get through the blind review filter, and as soon as that does, then what those ideological persons will say is, now we've got a blind review piece, that makes it right. So the process of scholarship is supposed to catch that, but it's not foolproof. But a good point, good question. Other ask in class? Yes. Okay, there's a lot on there. Oh, I see it over here. Oh, how to do cited in. We already talked about the cited in. Okay, that was the one. Who did the cited in? We just talked about cited in. Was that yours? Yeah.
When you cited somebody else.
Yes, that's the Miller Quick Guidelines. Gives you input on that. Oh, this is common too. She's got a study by, who's this study by?
What might be the confusion, like in one of those reviews,
Okay,
they
she's
quote
got it.
another study.
She's got a study by Galambos and Turner. Okay, and then what you should have done is, instead of just the purpose of, you should have just said Galambos and Turner, the date, did a study on. Just use them as the author, much more direct language. But then, so the article is by Galambos and Turner.
Yes.
Later on, when you were doing the second or third citation in the sentence, in the paragraph, you would say just Galambos.
Okay.
And just Galambos, but it's always Galambos and Turner.
Okay.
If it's two authors,
Okay. I
it's
was
Jones
confused
and
'cause-
Smith, Jones and Smith,
Okay.
Jones and Smith. Now, if it's three or more, it would be Galambos, Jones, and Smith, 2009 on the first citation, and every citation after that would be Galambos et al. But that's if there's three or more.
Okay.
And it used to be, and I keep getting this mixed up because as I get older, I remember things that I studied at Michigan State better than things I read yesterday. I don't know what that's saying about me, but a long time ago. So those memories are stronger than the more recent ones. But with APA 6 or 5, if it was 6 or more, it had to be 6 authors, I think, on the first one before you wouldn't list, I think you would list all 6. And if it was more than 6, you would do Jones et al., if it was 7 or more authors. And that, you're more and more frequent because there are huge grants. And what happens is that everybody on the huge grant, on that team, if they get an article out, various people are working on paper. So they might get 5 or 6 different articles out of this huge grant that have different first authors, or 1 or 2 authors, but the sequence of the et als is different. But because everybody's working on the grant, you may have 7 or 8 people listed on that grant that get credit for that. With APA 5, if there were 7 or more, it was et al. On the very first time. But if it was 6, you had to list Jones, Smith, all 6 of them, 2010, and then subsequently it was et al. But I think with APA 6, and you'd have to check this, I think maybe it's 5 or more that is et al. In the first one, and they do it differently in the citation list, in the reference list. But I'm not, don't quote me on that.
But
But
you're,
they did
what you
change-
want us to do is everybody at first, like if it's more than 3, and then the next time, just the ones at all.
And I'm not.
But if it's 2, you quote those 2 all the
Every time, or if it's 1, you quote that person.
Right.
But again, without checking your APA manual, I know that the way you handle that is different than it was in APA 5, now that it's APA 6, but how you handle that without me looking it up, that's not what I remember. Did you get the better understand? We talked about splitting sentences the first day. Okay, is that all on my thing?
I think there might have been some on the very last page.
Oh, yes. I've reminded you about this before, but it's worth doing again. Remember the APA issue that is most likely to be missed is putting in the issue number when it is in fact a consecutively paginated volume. Joanna, do you know what that means?
Yeah, I remember you talking about it, but I remember,
Well, it's consecutively paginated. You don't need the issue number because you can count. And so you can find that article without the issue number by looking at the page numbers. If it's issue paginated, if each issue starts over on page 1, you've got to have the issue number because there would be, say if the article is pages 45 to 80 to 56, there would be 4 sets of those in the 4 issues. And so without the issue number, you wouldn't know where it was. Okay. All right, I think that pretty much, any other questions on any of those?
I did have one, but I didn't know what it was. Sorry. I started.
Oh. What was this, Leader in Me? Leader in Me is a hot topic in schools across the nation. It is based on Covey's 7 Habits. And I thought it was telling that Barclay had hypothesized relationships of various kinds to culture and everything. Didn't even bother to check to see if it was related to achievement.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because many of the people who are into Leader in Me are into affective orientation. And they really don't care about achievement. Or they just assume that it's going to affect achievement without bothering to check. And you know what they say about assuming things.
Yeah.
So the other thing that is very parallel to that are the TEL surveys, Teaching, Empowering, Leading, and Learning, which is a statewide organization. I mean, it's a national movement. It's required in many state departments. About 37 states have adopted it. And it's a movement out of the New Teacher Center, which is University of California, Santa Barbara, I believe. It's a very teacher-oriented, and it's an affective teacher concerns kind of thing. And they have sold it across the nation, and it's been bought hook, line, and sinker, that it is the next answer to all things schools need, and it's going to increase achievement and everything else, and cure warts and everything else. But it doesn't affect achievement because it's affectively oriented. And so one of the things that all of those kinds of instruments do, somebody else had mentioned a climate survey, and I said, I don't know this one, what's its focus? Was that you? Same piece? A lot of this goes back to the guy that I studied with at Michigan State, Brookover, and his distinction on school learning climate versus school climate, which is often an affective adult orientation. And we went through this with the OCDQ by Halpin and Croft from the University of Chicago in '62. Everybody used the OCDQ, the Organizational Climate Description Questionnaire, for the next 2 decades. Everybody used it. And everybody assumed it was affecting achievement. Nobody bothered to check. A couple of researchers from Northwestern University had some data and they checked it. And they found it didn't. And they were flabbergasted. Shocked. Couldn't believe it. And they wrote a paragraph that used that kind of language. You don't see academics, especially from Northwestern, using that kind of language. But they did. They were so shocked. Brookover's explanation is very simple. The OCDQ is esprit de corps. It's affectively oriented. It's teacher concerns, staff concerns. There's nothing in it about learning climate. Brookover's work, the school effectiveness work, things that relate to achievement, focus on the learning climate. And those who are not aware of that repeat that same mistake. The leader, it's happening with the leader and me, it's happening with the TEL, and lots of other things. The new instrument that we wrote, if you notice that it's very much focused on learning.
Right.
Learning just jumps out at you at that.
Okay.
And it does predict achievement. That's the difference.
I have one more question.
Okay.
On
By the way, what we just said about K-12, that's also true of organizational climate generally, because there are organizational climates for all kinds of organizations, higher ed, business, not-for-profits, etc. And again, the focus is whether they're outcome-oriented or whether they're concerns-based affective orientation. So all those climate instruments, what I just said about K-12 schools applies to organizational climate questionnaires at all levels. So there are differences. So you should be aware of that. Okay.
For tell me to write full title, that's how the source wrote it, so I just still.
But I would look that up because that's unusual to see that.
I thought so too, and I saw it, but I just went with the
Okay.
way that the source had it
Okay.
published.
All right. So that's probably worth doing some Googling or
Okay.
checking the website, because I can't imagine that that's the actual name of the journal. It might be, but I would be surprised.
Okay. So basically, we don't necessarily go with the way that they publish it. It should
Well,
be.
if you've got an actual, if it's a PDF, then you're okay, because if you've got a title page, a PDF, if that's the way they do it, then yes, it would. But
Yeah, that's the way that it was on the article.
what was the article? A copy or
It was a PDF of it, but
Was it?
yeah.
well, then maybe that was okay.
I'll double check though. I was
Okay.
just curious.
It's highly unusual, but it may be that more and more places are doing that because of the shortcuts of electronic publishing. So that could be the case. Yes.
And another thing that I was wondering when I was doing mine was a lot of the work that I cited came from the same journal. Is there a problem with that? Like, does that mean that I'm too narrow?
Well,
Because-
Question is, have you hit an ideological blind spot? Peer-reviewed work tends to appear in a set of related journals. If everything is published by the same journal, by the same author or 2 or 3 authors, and nowhere else, then you begin to get suspicious.
So you should try to. So could you have? There were all different authors. That was the one thing. Like there were several different authors, but a lot of the work had been published in the leadership quarter, right?
Well, and it may be that that's just relevant, but I would certainly, that's worth looking elsewhere to see if you find anything else. If you don't find anything else, then that might be a red flag to be careful. Oh, speaking of bias, which we did in the storytelling piece, are you aware of these electronic sources is the possibility of bias that is unrecognized? When you're doing your searches, it is so easy to get information and articles from electronic journals because you just navigate a few spots with your mouse and click and print from the privacy of your bedroom with its computer sitting over on the desk, and you just sit there in your pajamas and you've printed an article. That's really handy. It's really easy. And it may be biased. How do you know? How do we know that articles that appear in electronic, easily accessible form are not systematically different than those that appear in other paper journals? Without doing some checking, you won't know. And if we only read the ones that are easily acceptable, you may be committing bias without being aware of it. The bias of ease of access. How many of you have ever thought about that? See? So I mean, that's just one of many things that you have to be aware of in terms of the possibility of bias. It's easy to do. Hey, it's easy for me too. I mean, it's human nature. Where does water go? Uphill or downhill? Where does water, it finds its easiest path. All right. I just had, All right, very quickly. Ten questions. Blank sheet of paper. Your attendance quiz. Yes.
You may not have got my mean-led review this year.
Did I give it back to you?
No, I didn't get one. So you were holding it for a reason.
That was not recommended.
We'll do some searching.
Did you get it from, did Caroline give it to you?
Yes, I think I got it somewhere. Let me do some searching. I thought I had searched all my piles, but maybe it was in a pile I didn't search. If that is the case, if I find it in my briefcase over there, I apologize. I thought I had them all, but
That's fine, just give me one.
it's a good thing that you alerted me because I shall do some more. I shall do some more searching at our first break. All right, quickly. There are 10 of these. Number 1, define operational definition. Number 2, assuming a variable is captured in a survey, what are 2 pieces of information about that variable that are typically given with an operational definition?
Will you repeat that?
Yeah. Assuming that a variable is captured in a survey, what are 2 pieces of information that are typically given along with the operational definition? You're talking about the variable. You're giving an operational definition for a variable that is part of a survey. So in addition to the operational definition itself, what's a couple of other pieces of information that's typically given? Number 3, what does the term isomorphic mean? Number 4, in measurement with respect to variables, what two things are being equated?
Will you repeat that one again?
In measurement with respect to variables, etc. What two things are being equated? By the way, I'm not 100% up to date from all of you on previous quiz dates, quiz scores. I should have 3 to this point. And I don't think I have 3 for everybody. So. Number 5, an easy one. What is another, more common, more technical name for degree of isomorphic fit? What is another, in parentheses, more common, more technical, end of parentheses, name for degree of isomorphic fit? One word. Number 6, what is the term for when statistical assumptions regarding quality of the data are not met? One word. What is the term for when statistical assumptions regarding the quality of the data are not met? Actually, it'd be 2 words. But I guess, well, put it this way, blank assumptions. So it's 2 words, but assumptions is the second word. So the answer to that one is blank assumptions.
Okay, will you read it one more time?
Yes.
That
That makes it a little easier. Okay, so what is the term for when statistical assumptions regarding quality of the data are not met? Blank assumptions.
Which number was that, 7?
Number 7, is there ever an instance when those assumptions not being met doesn't make much difference? Is there ever an instance when those assumptions, number 6, not being met doesn't make any difference, doesn't make much difference? Oh well. And number 8, you probably guessed this one, what's the term for that? So I guess that gives you a clue as to what the answer to number 7 is. So anybody that misses number 7 is not thinking very clearly here. You do see that 7 and 8 are not good questions, because in good questions, each question should be independent of the other questions. And that one clearly is not independent of the previous one. Number 9, strictly speaking, what is the scale of measurement for a Likert or Likert type response set of options? Strictly speaking, what is the scale of measurement of a Likert or Likert type response set of options? And number 10, what can you do to upgrade number 9? These are things you should know, by the way. So if you don't know them, you still have some things to learn.
Yeah.
Tough questions if you're a qualitative type, aren't they, Sarah?
Yeah. I was hoping more grammar questions were like last time.
All right, number one, what's an operational definition?
I remember talking about this last time when we looked at the dissertation, but.
But it's not set in your mind yet, is it?
No, it's not.
Is this when like, it's the definition that you're working with in your, whatever you're research?
Yes, but it's how you measure, it's how you measure it. The operational definition isn't, say if you're talking about height. The operational definition is how you measure height. Height is just a dimension, vertical dimension. But how you measure it is the operational definition. And we have to be explicit about that, because there's lots of different ways you can measure things. Do you remember the dissertation has lots of examples of those? The lines, 2008, 570 pages, and back about page 490 or something like that.
When you're doing research and there are multiple definitions for something, is it doing due diligence to like go over multiple definitions and then talk about which one you're going with?
Well, it depends on how much detail you want and what you need, but if there's controversy in the field, then, but it may be that what happens is that the field over time, it started with one and then there have been upgrades and that everybody has kind of settled on this one. But if there's controversy in the field, and some use this and some use this and some use that, then you might want to say, well, there's three that are used majority of the time. The distinctions between them are, for the purpose of this paper, this one, something like that. That's a good question. Assuming a variable is captured in a survey, what are two pieces of information that are typically given with an operational definition? Well, as well as the operational definition itself, you would typically say what is the level, what is the scale of measurement on it. And the other thing is, what is the item number in a survey? So if you're given the operational definition, you're talking about it, and you give what the scale of measurement is, you might also want to say, so in the survey, it's item number 16. Or it's items 16 through 21 or whatever. Number 3, what does isomorphic mean? Literally, iso is same, Greek prefix. Morph is body, so literally, sameness of the bodies. More indirectly, it's the sense to which two things are the same, or have similarities. Number 4, in measurement, what two things are being equated? The concept on the one hand, and the operational definition on the other. What is height? Well, the concept would be vertical dimension, from the top to bottom of the object. The operational definition would be that vertical distance measured in feet and inches, or meters and centimeters, or light years, or whatever. Number 5, hope everybody got this one. What is another, more common, more technical name for degree of isomorphic fit? Anybody? The V word. Validity. That's what validity is. Quickest, shortest definition of validity is the extent to which something is what it purports to be. Number 6, what's the term for when statistical assumptions regarding the quality of data are not met? Violating assumptions. certain assumptions about the quality of data. You're using statistical procedures that assume those quality of data, and you use those statistical procedures on data that don't meet those standards, you have violated assumptions.
Is that a common term? Is there another term that means the same thing?
That's the most common that I'm aware of. There may be other terms. Remember I used the example of the George Bush tax cut, $300 tax cut average? That
She
was-
wasn't here. You did last time.
Yeah, I've watched the video clips, but I don't remember.
When back in 2001, it was widely discussed and eventually sold to the public that the budget surplus left over from the Clinton administration needed to go back to the populace in the form of a tax cut. And it was widely sold that that tax cut was going to be an average $300 tax cut for taxpayers. And I'm assuming that arithmetically, in fact, it was a $300 tax cut. But that's not a valid statement to the public. Because while it is, if you do the math and you do the average of 300, you have a highly skewed database, positively skewed. Because you have millionaires and billionaires that have much bigger, and so that skews it. And with mean, you're supposed to apply the mean to a normal curve data. And that's highly skewed data. So you can still apply the mean, you still get 300, but that's a distorted, that's not a valid use of the mean. So therefore, the $300 might be accurate in terms of arithmetic. It is not valid in terms of reporting it. Instead, you should have reported the median. The median is the measure of central tendency for highly skewed data. Why didn't they do the median? Because it would probably been $120 instead of $300, and they could get away with it. But that violated assumptions, so they should have reported the other. And then I asked the question, did George Bush know the difference? And may or may not have. He probably should have. He had an MBA from Yale, but that was a long time ago, so he may or may not have realized that. But his economic advisors, all of whom had PhDs in economics, did know that. Because that's by far the most quantitative discipline. And so anybody who is a PhD has probably had 10 or 11 or 12, 13 classes of quantitative stats. And they would know that. And they did it anyway. Remember the expression liars, damn liars, and politicians and statisticians and all that?
No.
You've never heard that?
No.
Liars, damn liars, and statisticians? Liars are bad, damn liars are worse than liars, and statisticians are even worse than damn liars. You've never heard that expression? Liars, damn liars, and statisticians?
No, I'm not learning, I haven't heard.
Where have you folks been? Some of you other, when we talked about, some of the others had heard that, hadn't you?
I thought it was Disraeli who said that.
It might have been, it might have been. I'm not sure, that's one of the, some of you that are good at Googling could find out who originally did say that, but and then of course the parallel is liars, damn liars, statisticians, and damn lying politicians who use statisticians to lie. You have to be, you don't think people with power do that kind of stuff?
Oh, of course, yes.
See, this is a class in helping people get rid of their naivety. Well, isn't that a good thing to do?
Maybe.
All right.
It was popular, oh, this is Wikipedia, so you can only
Yeah.
take it or leave it. It was popularized by
Okay,
Mark.
did you hear what you just said? You missed that, but that was a good statement. Say that again.
It's Wikipedia, so you can take it or leave it,
Okay.
because it's a wiki, so you guys know they can. It says the term was popularized by Mark Twain, and then it says among others, but he attributed it to the British Prime Minister Disraeli.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Twain back to this rate.
Cool.
Very good.
Way to know it.
Brant, I must say that of all the times I've said that, you're the first person that ever said, didn't that go back to Disraeli? So
That
kudos to
impressed me.
you.
When I hit Disraeli, I was like, come in there, Brand.
You have one intellectual in here.
And a
Um,
lot of us that can Google.
Is there ever an instance when the assumption being violated are not, when the assumption is not being met, doesn't make any much difference. The
Yes.
answer, yes.
I'm confident in that one, I'll volunteer.
And then what's the term for that, number 8?
Then when it falls like within standard deviation?
No, that's when, that's given the extent to which that applies. But the term itself, it's robust to that violation. If you have an instance where it really doesn't make much difference. Some statistical procedures are more robust to those violations than others. You can go ahead and violate them and it really doesn't make much difference. Some are much more sensitive to that. The mean, for example, is robust to the violation that you must have ratio data. Because technically speaking, you should have ratio, but it is robust to that as long as you have, in most instances, of continuous data. There are some instances of continuous data where that wouldn't work, but in most instances of continuous data, that will work. The mean, however, is not robust to the violation of normality.
See, I think when you say robust, I think of coffee. I don't even know.
I think of,
I think of, you think of it.
Folks, I will pass on that. I've never had a cup of coffee in my life.
Are you kidding me?
me
Wow.
either.
I don't like the smell of it, and I've never drunk it.
And I
And
don't
I don't like
understand the-
tea, and I've never drunk tea.
And what's the concept of an acquired taste? Where did they come up with that?
I don't know. Why do you have to learn to like something that you don't?
Because that's what my mom says all the time. Oh, if you drink it, you'll learn to like it. I don't want to.
That's what people used to tell me about
I don't
beer.
learn to
You'll
like
cultivate
something.
a
Well,
taste.
see,
I'm
now
like,
that's
why
another
would you
thing.
wanna cultivate a
I don't,
taste?
I don't like the smell of beer, and I've never drunk beer either.
You're a
So-
super taster.
So, but I made up for the caffeine with diet soda. Many diet sodas over the
Probably
years.
don't eat Brussels sprouts either.
No.
You do? Okay. Huh, I'm a super taster for bitter.
All right, strictly speaking, what's the scale of measurement of a Likert or Likert type response set of options?
1,
5,
5,
Huh?
5, traditional.
Oh, no, that's how many.
Like
But what's
equal
the scale of
intervals.
measurement?
Agree.
Well, that's agree, disagree. That's what is the response set. Likert type would be important, unimportant, valuable, unimportant, unvaluable. Likert is strictly agree, disagree. But what I'm looking for there, the scale of measurement would be ordinal.
I did too.
You least that's on the right track.
Well, but see now, remember, ordinal is that they are ordered, but they're not equally spaced. And the problem with the Likert or a Likert type scale is you don't know for sure that the distance in the mind of the respondent from very unimportant to neutral to important to very important, you don't know that those spaces are equally big or small. So that's not a continuous variable, that's an ordinal variable. And are we supposed to do means and standard deviations of those items if you have ordinal data? No, you've got to have at least continuous data. But we do it all the time, and there's an easy fix for it. And some surveys do it, a lot don't. What's the easy fix?
Use numbers.
You put the very unimportant, neutral, important, very important at the top, but you also put numbers at the top. So then they're circling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that you have equated 1 equals very unimportant to 5 equals very important. And that way you have made something that may or may not be equally spaced. You have made it equally spaced by the simple things of equating them to numbers. So you have upgraded an ordinal scale to an interval scale by adding the numbers. It's a simple trick. And you should always do it. Didn't we cover that stuff last week in the mind?
You did.
In my
We did.
super rubric? Speaking of super rubrics, is today the day or is it next what time that you have to hand in your,
Next time.
next week?
Yes.
So you have one more week.
Yes.
Have you started working on them?
Been
Been frying other fish?
a little bit. Yes.
I've been trying to get through that
Book.
book. It's really hard to read.
Which one's that?
The one on the surveys.
Oh, Fowler? Okay. Hand in or, don't forget to send me your scores. It's an email.
Okay, that, I didn't know it was, I did my first one, but I didn't know if we were here that we were supposed to send it to
Yeah,
you, so, okay.
So what was number 10?
You,
Add
put numbers on it,
I use numbers on, okay.
Yeah. which
I put
upgrades it
interval
from,
values.
which upgrades it from ordinal to interval. Because the numbers we know are equal spaced. The respondent will say, whatever the difference between a 1 and a 2 is the same as the difference between a 2 and a 3.
So would interval values work for me to get credit for that one? I need some credit.
I'm not as, I'm not grading you on
Well,
these.
partial
These are just
credit?
things to think about and reminders of things that you should be learning, so.
Partial credit? Check mark credit?
Okay, a brief break, and then who's up first?
Who always going to that?
Let me get out my.
I'm chapter 8.
I'll go ahead and.
I didn't know if he was gonna go in
Chapter
order, or, you know, I mean, 'cause
Let
You
me
want
get
us to
out
do it
my.
at the same time?
I'll do my 15-minute if you want me to.
I'll do
You check.
I'll do mine.
Correct.
I mean, I don't care to, I just wanna make sure.
Here's my list, let's see.
Start my short one.
I go. You're A. Candy, are you?
I'm 4.
Joanne, did you do yours last time?
Joetta.
Joanna.
Joetta.
Oh, Joanna's gone.
She's
So-
gone. Yeah, I did not, but I'm ready with it, so I'll do.
3
I'm,
and 10.
I'm number 8. I'm chapter 8. Joanne was supposed to do.
Who's got
2.
chapter 4? Candy.
I didn't do it.
When we come back, we'll do candies.
Gotcha.
Okay, so if you want to set your thing up. All right, quick break.
Do you want me to do my 15-minute
You
presentation
might as well.
right after? Okay.
Okay, this one.
I have a question for you. I pulled up that journal, and
What's it say?
the journal is titled Journal of College Student Retention.
That's what I would have guessed.
But I wasn't even sure if that could have been junior college student retention.
I would have guessed, oh, well, it could have been, I guess.
But then it also adds research theory and practice. Should that be added to the end of it?
That is the official name of the journal.
So I should put the whole thing there. Okay. But yeah, here's the PDF of the journal, and that's how it's listed.
All right, but see, sometimes that's shortcut stuff.
Right, okay.
So I was right to be suspicious, wasn't I?
Well, I was suspicious too, but I always go with, I write it how it was published in
but-
here, and
Yeah, but
wasn't
that
quite
was-
sure.
That was just one of those intuitive sense that
Let's just go ahead and do that.
But I would think that if there could be